Good morning. Welcome to Sunday worship at the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Burlington. We acknowledge that our UU Meeting House and our homes, our schools, our places of work are built on the unceded lands of the Western Abenaki people. We remember the hardship and violence the Abenaki have endured because of colonialism and white supremacy. We give thanks for the opportunity to share in this place and to protect it and to care for all those who live here. As a Unitarian Universalist faith community, we warmly welcome all people to the shared work of building beloved community and making meaning in our lives. This work is neither easy nor simple, which is why we need one another, longtime members, newcomers, and visitors. Whatever it took you to get here, whatever burdens and joys you're carrying, whatever you most hope for or most fear, all belongs, and so do you. I'm Geoff Duke, a member of the Worship Associates team. Developmental Senior Minister Reverend Patricia Hart is leading today's service. Creating Sunday worship services takes many hands. Please join me in extending thanks to all who are making today's service possible. Special thanks to James Stewart, Director of Music, to Erika Reif, Director of Lifespan Faith Development, to tech team members Woody Fulton, Memphis Everest, and Xander Herrick. Thanks to Claire Graham-Smith for the banner quilt emergence, and to Peggy Derby for the flowers. I have a few announcements this morning. After the service this morning, all are invited to join our Zoom coffee hour for some community fellowship. You will find the link to join on our website, uusociety.org. We use breakout rooms so everyone has a chance to hear and, if you like, to be heard. I hope you'll participate. Registration is presently underway for our next season of theme circles. The circles start the third week of February. Theme circles are a wonderful way to make new friends, connect with old friends, and to foster meaningful connections in our large congregation. There's more information and a link to sign up in this week's e-news email and on our website. Your FUUSB board will be hosting an important virtual conversation next Sunday, January 23rd at noon, entitled Who Are We Now? As our society approaches the start of a search for a new settled minister, we need to begin to think about who we are and how we want to present ourselves to ministerial candidates. Please refer to the e-news and to our website for more information and a link to participate. The Greater Burlington Multicultural Resource Center has announced that the annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Remembrance will be taking place today at 3 p.m. in the sanctuary of St. Joseph's Cathedral Church and also by live stream. More information can be found on our website, uusociety.org.
Say the words with me as we light our chalice. We kindle this chalice flame to remind ourselves of the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment. Let us light our chalice this morning in solidarity with the people of Congregation Beth Israel in Texas, whose Sabbath service was violently invaded and disrupted yesterday. May our hearts be full with gratitude that all held hostage are now safe and for those who rescued them. With grief for our country's epidemic of gun violence and hate and for the life that was lost. And may our hearts be full especially of love and support for our Jewish siblings here in Burlington and in Vermont, throughout the country and around the world. We weep with you and hold you in our prayers. Today's call to worship from the work of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. He asks, cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time when one must take a position that is neither safe nor politic nor popular, but one must take it because it is right. Before our first hymn this morning, I want to give you a little background for the music, the hymns in particular in this service today. Songs that you've probably heard before, but their history is interesting. As you know, South Africa's racial injustice did not arise from a slave economy, as in the United States. It arose from colonial occupation, first by the Dutch in the mid-1600s and later the British, beginning in 1815. Throughout the struggle against the system of apartheid, which is officially listed as 1948 to 1994, freedom songs helped spread the news of the struggle. And the musical roots of some of these songs can be found in the long history of trade and commerce and European missions with South Africa. A musical result is a kind of synthesis of traditional African music and Western hymnody. The songs spread around the world during those anti-apartheid years and helped to increase the awareness of the anti-apartheid struggle in Europe and the United States. South African freedom songs like Siyahamba, which we'll see a video of later in the service, originated, as it turns out, with a Methodist young men's singing group called Amadodana. But Freedom is Coming, the song that James is about to play, is by Anders Nyberg, who is a Swedish musician from Stockholm, still working. In 1978, he took his choir to apartheid South Africa, and he fell in love with the country. He spent a lot of time there, and now is a citizen of South Africa as well as of Sweden. His singers spread the songs that they learned and changed in churches throughout Sweden after they came back. And then there was a big performance that they gave at a Lutheran World Assembly in Budapest in 1984. Anders Nyberg has collected 3 volumes of freedom songs. They were published in Sweden and then by the Iona community in Scotland and in the United States. Some were included in the official Church of Sweden Lutheran hymnal, and a few of them in the UUA Singing the Journey in 2005. Freedom is coming. Please join in.
Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, freedom is coming. Sing that with me. Freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, freedom is coming. Freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, freedom is coming. Freedom, freedom, oh, freedom, freedom is coming.
Yes, I know.
Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh, yes, I know. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Freedom is coming. Oh, yes, I'm freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Freedom is coming. Let's try justice. Justice. Oh, justice. Oh, justice. Justice is coming. Justice. Justice is coming. Justice is coming. Justice is coming, oh yes, I know. Justice is coming, justice is coming, justice is coming. Back to freedom. Freedom, oh freedom, oh freedom, freedom is coming, oh yes, I know. Freedom is coming, freedom is coming, freedom is coming, oh yes, I know. Freedom is coming, freedom is coming, freedom is coming, oh yes, I know.
Good morning. I'm Erika, Reif, the Director of Lifespan Faith Development. And this morning, I would like to share with you a story written by another UU religious professional you may have heard of, Matt Meyer. And it's called Desmond Gets Free. It's based on a quote by the Archbishop, Desmond Tutu, in which he says, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. An elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse, and you say that you are neutral. The mouse will not appreciate your neutrality." Desmond Gets Free by Matt Meyer, illustrated by Khim Fam. Desmond the mouse lived in the most beautiful meadow in all the land. Every morning, Desmond woke with the sunrise and would spend the day playing in the meadow. And every evening, Desmond would go to sleep in the middle of the meadow under the beautiful starry sky. One night, though, Desmond woke when it was still dark out. He tried to roll over to a more comfortable spot, but something wasn't right. Desmond realized that his tail was stuck right to the ground and beginning to throb with pain. He felt behind him, and there was a huge boulder that seemed to have fallen in the middle of the meadow just on his tail. Desmond pulled on the boulder and tugged on his tail. He pushed on the boulder and tugged on his tail, and he pushed and he tugged and he pushed and he tugged, but it was no use. When he was out of breath and had just about given up, he saw a giraffe nearby in the grass. "Good news," he thought. "Oh, giraffe," Desmond cried, "could you please push the boulder a few inches to in the other direction so that I could go free?" The giraffe looked at Desmond and laughed the way giraffes do. "Silly mouse," said the giraffe. "That's no boulder, that's an elephant. Has fallen asleep in the middle of the meadow just on your tail. Well, if you could just wake that elephant and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction, I could go free." "Well," replied the giraffe, "you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best to not get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like these." Desmond quietly replied, "Well, I do not appreciate your neutrality." The giraffe wandered off, and Desmond tried calling out to the elephant to wake him up, but those giant ears were just too far away on the other side of that giant elephant body. So again, Desmond pushed on the elephant and tugged on his tail. He pushed and he tugged and he pushed and tugged, but it was no use. When he was out of breath and had just about given up again, a gazelle wandered by. "Oh, gazelle," he cried. "Oh, gazelle, it seems that an elephant has fallen asleep on my tail in the middle of the meadow. I am stuck, and it hurts. I wonder if you could gently wake him and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction so I might go free." "Well," said the gazelle, "I see your problem there, but you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best not to get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like these. Desmond replied, almost to himself this time, I do not appreciate your neutrality. Desmond tried again to call out to the elephant. He tried again to push the giant animal away. He tried again and again to tug that little tail free, but it was no use. When he was out of breath and had just about given up for the last time, he saw another mouse wandering through the meadow. My name is Nelson. Nelson, this giant elephant has fallen asleep just on my tail in the middle of this meadow. I wonder if you might run over and call into his giant ears and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction so I could go free, Desmond asked. Of course, said Nelson. Nelson ran all the way to the other end of the giant elephant body, and he called up to those giant elephant ears at the top of that giant elephant head, but the elephant didn't budge. The elephant heard Nelson's small voice far away, but he felt too comfortable to move. Nelson ran back to Desmond, a little out of breath, and said, I have an idea. Don't move. He ran off. I won't, muttered Desmond. A little while later, though, Nelson emerged through the tall grass, and he wasn't alone. Nelson had found 3 other mouse friends to help him, and each of them had also brought another 3 friends. The whole group of them ran over to the giant head of that giant elephant. One mouse scrambled up onto the shoulders of another, and another mouse scrambled up on her shoulders. And then one after another, they climbed up until the whole group of them had formed a long mouse ladder right up the side of the elephant. At last, Nelson climbed up on the shoulders of his mouse friends, and one on top of the other until he was way up on that giant elephant head, standing next to that giant elephant ear. Excuse me, he called out right into the ear. It seems you've fallen asleep on my friend's tail in the middle of this meadow. I wonder if you could just roll over a few inches in the other direction so he might go free. The giant elephant made a giant low gruff. I'm comfortable just where I am. Go away. Then Nelson had an idea. He whispered to the mice, and then all at once they yelled out together, Excuse us! It seems you've fallen asleep on our friend's tail in the middle of this meadow. Roll over a few inches in the other direction so he can go free. This time, all those voices together right next to the elephant's ear were too loud to ignore. I was comfortable where I was, but I'll move over if you just agree to stop making such a racket, the elephant cried out. And then the elephant rolled over, just a few inches in the other direction. Nelson and the other mice helped each other climb back down, and Desmond was finally free. Desmond and Nelson and all their mouse friends spent the rest of that beautiful day playing in the middle of the beautiful meadow.
As we let these words and music settle into us, let us deepen together into a time of meditation. We will begin by sharing the joys and sorrows of our community, and then hold a moment of silence. Let us begin with 3 deep breaths. One for the solid earth beneath us. One for the changing sky above us. And one for the living waters all around us. Come now into a place of peace and holy listening. Let us hear these words of joy and sorrow for this day, Sunday, January 16th, 2022. Gratitude for the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and the many people who worked with him and who have carried on his work of changing the world and who have changed all of us along the way. May the joys and sorrows of each be the joys and sorrows of all, reminding us of our shared humanity. As we enter this moment of silence, let us hold that which has been spoken and that which remains unspoken gently in our hearts. Blessed be. The reading this morning comes from Walking Toward Morning, a collection of meditations by Reverend Victoria Safford, minister of the White Bear Unitarian Universalist Church in Minnesota. Set in stone. In a cemetery once, an old one in New England, I found a strangely soothing epitaph. The name of the deceased and her dates had been scoured away by rain and wind, but there was a carving of a tree with roots and branches, a classic 19th century motif, and among them the words, "She attended well and faithfully to a few worthy things." At first this seemed to me a little meager, a little stingy on the part of her survivors, but I wrote it down and have thought about it since, and now I can't imagine a more proud or satisfying legacy. She attended well and faithfully to a few worthy things. Every day I stand in danger of being struck by lightning and having the obituary in a local paper say, for all the world to see, she attended frantically and ineffectually to a great many unimportant, meaningless details. How do you want your obituary to read? He got all the dishes washed and dried before playing with his children in the evening. She balanced her checkbook with meticulous precision and never missed a day of work. Missed a lot of sunsets, missed a lot of love, missed a lot of risk, missed a lot, but her money was in order. She answered all her calls, all her email, all her voicemail, but along the way she forgot to answer the call to service and compassion and forgiveness, first and foremost of herself. He gave and forgave sparingly, without radical intention, without passion or conviction. She could not, or would not, hear the calling of her heart. How will it read? How does it read? And if you had to name a few worthy things to which you attend well and faithfully, what, I wonder, would they be? So ends the reading.
Congregation exists and functions and is a force in this community entirely because of the generosity and the devotion and the optimism and the vision of the people who support it. You, the members and the friends of this congregation. One of the reasons we keep on taking up a collection in our services, even when no one is here. You're all out there someplace, but we need to remember that it's us. It is our work to make this congregation real in the world. What a responsibility and what a privilege. We also share the offering of this congregation every week. Every month, we choose a beneficiary. And the beneficiary this month is the Nulhegan Band, a particular program of the Nulhegan Band of the Cusuk Abenaki Nation. These are the indigenous people upon whose unceded lands we live. The Nulhegan Abenaki tribe operates a food sovereignty program, which is aimed at providing indigenous crops to its tribal citizens. A small and not at all small idea. Your gifts to the offering today and this whole month will be shared with this effort known as Abenaki Helping Abenaki. Your gifts will make a difference, as they do every week. I hope you will speak with me the words of dedication for this morning's offering. With gratitude, we dedicate these gifts in the service of our mission, to inspire spiritual growth, to care for each other and our community, seek truth, and act for justice. Thank you, James. In October of 1981, my former husband and I moved from New Haven, Connecticut to Gabon, a country on the west coast of Africa. It's right on the equator. I wish I'd found a picture to put in the live stream, so you need to promise me that you'll look online or on your globe to figure out where Gabon is. We were there because my husband, Andrew, had a deep sense of connection with Western Africa. And he went to business school, not really his first choice, but he did it so he could have the degree that would get him hired to do economic development work in that part of the world. He took a job with Citibank, which was a fast way to work in that part of the world and a way to make enough money to support a family, which at that point was me and our first child, Patrick, who was not quite 2. For 1982 and 1983 and part of 1984, we lived in Gabon. It is striking to me to look back and try to remember what I knew at that point about South Africa. Gabon and South Africa are a long way apart, according to Google Maps, about 3,000 miles or so. Still, both were major commercial centers at that point, especially in the oil industry, and it was reasonable to expect that there might have been flights you could take from one place to another. But in most of the 1980s, there were no commercial flights from Gabon to South Africa, from a lot of places to South Africa directly. It was a hard place to get to. The divestment campaign, pressuring multinational companies, including Citibank, by the way, to cease doing business in South Africa, with South Africa, the demand to universities to divest in all companies that continued to do work in South Africa was gaining momentum. South Africa was increasingly isolated, vilified around the world, more and more taken up by the violence and chaos that was so present. It would be another decade before real change came, before Nelson Mandela was released from prison, before Mandela and F.W. de Klerk would negotiate the end of apartheid, and the Republic of South Africa would be born with Mandela as its first president. Like most other informed American citizens in the early 1980s, I never imagined such an outcome was possible. I assumed, like everybody I knew, that the only way apartheid would ever end would be with a bloodbath. I don't remember. I just don't remember if I knew much about one person who always believed in that peaceful resolution, in the idea that justice was possible, that freedom was coming. That one person was Desmond Tutu, who died a few weeks ago. Archbishop Desmond Tutu is described, has been for decades now, as one of the world's most prominent spiritual leaders. He attained worldwide respect for his, quote, uncompromising stand for justice and reconciliation and his unmatched integrity. After the end of apartheid, Desmond Tutu became perhaps the world's most prominent religious leader who advocated for gay and lesbian rights. Jesse Jackson referred to Desmond Tutu as the Martin Luther King of South Africa. Jesse Jackson wasn't the only one. We all know about Archbishop Tutu now. But who was he? Who was Desmond Mpilo Tutu? He was born in 1931 in a small city in northwestern South Africa. His family was poor. His father was the principal of a Methodist school. His mother worked as a cook and a cleaner at a different school for the blind. Desmond graduated from high school in 1950. His family couldn't afford to send him to medical school, which is where he wanted to go, so instead he became a teacher. And upon his graduation, Tutu returned to his high school to teach where he had graduated from, to teach English and history. I tried to be what my teachers had been to me, to these kids, he said, seeking to instill in them a pride in themselves, a pride in what they were doing, a pride that said they may define you as so-and-so, you aren't that. Make sure you prove them wrong by becoming what the potential in you says you can become. It's easy to imagine him as a wonderful teacher. But he couldn't teach what he knew. He couldn't teach the truth. The South African government some years before had passed the Bantu Education Act, which intentionally lowered the standards of education for Black South Africans to ensure that they only learned what was necessary for a life of servitude. The government spent 1/10 the money on the education of a Black student as they did on the education of a white student. Desmond Tutu decided that he could not continue participating in an educational system that was explicitly designed to promote inequality. So he quit teaching in 1957. Tutu frequently told a story that happened about this time in his life. He recalled a day when he was out walking with his mother and they encountered a white man, a priest that he knew, named Trevor Huddleston. Desmond knew Reverend Huddleston, but Reverend Huddleston had never met Desmond's mother, and he tipped his hat to Desmond's mother on the street. This was the first time that Desmond had ever seen a white man pay respect to a Black woman. This incident made a profound impression on Desmond Tutu, maybe making the point that he did not need to accept discrimination, and that religion could be a powerful tool for advocating racial equality, which may be part of the reason behind Tutu's decision to study for the ministry. He was ordained as an Anglican deacon in 1960 and as a priest in 1961, and in 1962 he left South Africa to study in England, receiving his Master's of Theology from King's College London in 1966. During the early 1970s, his theology changed. He was working for the Theological Education Fund, which was part of a worldwide missionary effort that later became the World Council of Churches. But his job took him all over Africa, where he learned about African theology and learned what was happening in so many of the countries in the continent where he was living. He learned about liberation theology, and he learned about Black theology. And in 1973, he was, for a while, at Union Theological Seminary in New York City. He presented a paper there in which he stated that Black theology is an engaged, not an academic, detached theology. It is a gut-level theology relating to the real concerns, the life and death issues of the Black man. We might make the change that he would make and say, Black people. His paper made it clear that he was not attempting to demonstrate the academic respectability of Black theology. He wrote, "No permission is being requested for it to come into being. Frankly, the time has passed when we will wait for the white man to give us permission. Whether or not he accepts the intellectual respectability of our activity is largely irrelevant. We will proceed regardless. In 1978, Tutu was appointed General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches, a position that he used to become the leading spokesperson for the rights of Black South Africans. 1979 is the first time we know that Tutu publicly called for an international economic boycott of South Africa. Because of that, he was called before some government ministers to be reprimanded in October of that year, but that didn't stop him. During the 1980s, Tutu's role in drawing national and international attention to the iniquities of apartheid was unrivaled. In March 1980, the government confiscated his passport, something that happened a number of times during that decade, but of course it had the effect of raising his international profile. It brought condemnations, among other places, from the US State Department. In all the times that his passport was not confiscated, he traveled all over Europe, all over the United States. He was given many honorary degrees, I think it was about 100, and awards, including in 1984, the Nobel Peace Prize. He was nominated in 1981, in 1982, and 1983. They chose him in 1984 because they thought he might be a less radical possibility than some other Black activists. In 1985, he was Bishop of Johannesburg. But in 1986, the most important position that he held, he was made Archbishop of Cape Town, which is the most senior position in Southern Africa's Anglican hierarchy. He made the most of that position, and it's interesting to notice that his favorite nickname, which he was called from then on till the end of his life, was Arch. It is interesting, given all of these years, given what was happening in this country in those years, it's of course important to compare the racial justice movement in the United States to what was going on, what Desmond Tutu was a part of in South Africa. Desmond Tutu was born in 1931. Martin Luther King was born in 1929. They were almost the same age, but their lives meant that they did not overlap very much. And although both movements were aiming to achieve justice, many, including Desmond Tutu, have pointed out some really essential differences, especially this one. Black men and women, he said, in the US at least had a constitution that theoretically guaranteed fundamental rights for all. In South Africa, he said, the Constitution is against us. He believed in nonviolence. He, like King, was influenced by Gandhi. But he said nonviolence presupposes a minimum moral level. The oppressor society must be capable of moral revulsion. And when a minimum moral level does not operate, he said, I don't think nonviolence can succeed. It happened in Gandhi's Britain and it happened in King's America, but I don't see that happening here, he said. In 1985, he said this, we face a catastrophe in this land, and only the action of the international community by applying pressure can save us. Our children are dying. Our land is bleeding and burning, and so I call the international community to apply punitive sanctions against this government to help us establish a new South Africa, non-racial, democratic, participatory, and just. This divestment campaign is a nonviolent strategy to help us do so. There is a great deal of goodwill, he said, still in our country between the races. Let us not be so wanton in destroying it. we can live together as one people, one family, black and white, together. In 1993, South African apartheid finally came to an end. And in 1994, South Africans elected Nelson Mandela as their first black president. The honor of introducing the new president to the nation fell to the Archbishop. And soon after, the question of how to come to terms with the violence and trauma and betrayals and so many deaths of those years that brought finally apartheid to an end resulted in the creation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was established by the South African Parliament in 1995. Their job was to investigate and report on the atrocities committed by both sides in the struggle over apartheid. Nelson Mandela named Desmond Tutu as the chair, and Tutu created a threefold approach, 3 steps. First, confession, with those responsible for human rights abuses fully disclosing their activities. Second, forgiveness, a legal amnesty, in this case, from prosecution. And third, restitution, with the perpetrators making amends to their victims as well as they could. It was a massive project. The commission employed over 300 staff, was divided into 3 committees, and held as many as 4 hearings simultaneously. This was restorative justice that Desmond Tutu organized, and he considered that characteristic of traditional African jurisprudence in the spirit, he said, of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is not just an operating system. It's a Southern African idea, which Desmond Tutu defined this way. It refers, he said, to gentleness, to compassion, to hospitality, to openness to others, to vulnerability, to be available to others, and to know that you are bound up with them in the bundle of life. Even after that, even after apartheid was officially gone, Desmond Tutu did not stop. His status as a gay rights activist kept him in the public eye around the world. He regarded discrimination against homosexuals as being the equivalent to discrimination against black people and women. And he said this, "I would refuse to go to a homophobic heaven. No, I would say sorry. I mean, I would much rather go to the other place. I would not worship a God who is homophobic, and that is how deeply I feel about this. I am as passionate about this campaign as I ever was about apartheid. For me, it is at the same level." He did not stop. Gay rights, HIV and AIDS, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Iraq war. He was a very public critic whenever he felt that criticism was warranted. He was a critic of the ANC government. He was a critic of Nelson Mandela when he thought Mandela made a mistake. One of the best instances of that, I think, especially because Desmond Tutu loved to laugh, is he criticized Mandela for wearing those bright African shirts that he wore, and Mandela shot back that, he has some nerve saying that. He wears a dress. That was their relationship. He was critical of other presidents, and right up until the end of his life, wanted his new country to be better than it sometimes was and is. He talked about climate change, and he fought for the right for the terminally ill to die with dignity. He did not stop. And throughout all of it, he had what appears to be an unshakable optimism. Not just that things might work out, but in the ability of human beings to do good. Despite all the ghastliness in the world, he said, human beings are made for goodness. The ones that are held in high regard are not militarily powerful, he said, nor even economically prosperous, but they have a commitment to try and make the world a better place. So here we are on Martin Luther King Day in 2022, a time when in our country, in so many states, laws are being written and rewritten not to protect the vote, but to deny it, to suppress it, to subvert it. Some of the words our current president used just this week. And it makes sense, it's important to remember that Dr. King's speech at the Alabama State Capitol at the end of the march from Selma in 1965 was in the middle of a fight about voting rights and voting rights law. This holiday, it is discouraging, to say the least, to think that Martin Luther King would look around at our country and see conflicts that are numbingly familiar. And one of the things that King talked about in Montgomery in 1965 was the what Jelani Cobb calls the intransigent optimism that led activists to fight for change, in the face of skepticism about what could actually be achieved. Those of us who are well-informed and know how to do skepticism well are sometimes hesitant to imagine a good solution, a possible outcome. President Biden struck a similar note this week. He said, as he often says things like this, for those who believe in democracy, anything is possible. Anything. Anything is possible right now. And that is as much cause for hope as it is for grave concern. One of the last projects that Desmond Tutu took on was one of his many books. This one was written with his daughter, Mfo, who's an Anglican. His other daughter's an Anglican minister. She's an author. They called it The Book of Forgiving. And I will end with just a few words from this book. It seems there is no end to the creative ways we humans can hurt each other, and no end to the reasons why we feel justified in doing so. There is also no end to the human capacity for healing. In each of us, there is an innate ability to create joy out of suffering. And they said these two simple truths. There is nothing that cannot be forgiven, and there is no one undeserving of forgiveness. When you can understand that we are all bound together, you know these truths. In South Africa, there would have been no future without forgiveness. Our rage and our quest for revenge would have been our destruction. This was true individually and globally, they said. We are all broken. Out of that brokenness, we hurt others. Forgiveness is how we bring peace to ourselves and our world. So may it be. Say the words with me as we extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts and share with the world until we are together again. Our benediction today is from Mahatma Gandhi. He said, "It's the action, not the fruit of the action, that's important. You have to do the right thing. It may not be in your power, may not be in your time that there'll be any fruit. But that doesn't mean you stop doing the right thing. You may never know what results come from your action, but if you do nothing, there will be no result. Do the right thing." We can do that together. Go in peace.